Liberty process.
Liberty Process Freedom Series Hopper Pump Model 2 FJL 2.6. The FFL and FJL Freedom Series sanitary pumps are manufactured specifically for use in food, beverage, and cosmetic industries. The construction is rugged and simple, and the design is focused on fast disassembly for effective cleaning. The media contacting metallic parts with their characteristic polished smooth finish are comprised of 316 stainless steel. Liberty's wide-throat hopper inlets, utilizing a coupling rod-mounted auger, are perfect for media that is highly viscous in nature. Instructions for pump disassembly. Tools required: a 10mm wrench, a 17mm wrench, a pin punch and hammer, a small spanner wrench, a small flat-bladed screwdriver, a strap wrench, a rubber mallet, pliers, 2 flat-bladed screwdrivers, and an arbor press or hydraulic press. If the pump is installed, turn off the power and disconnect the power source. Close the suction and discharge valves to isolate the pump from the liquid media. If seal flush water is in use to the pump shaft seal packing, turn it off. Disconnect and remove the piping from the stator and suction end of the pump. Remove pump from base plate and remove shaft coupling. The pump is now ready for disassembly. Pump disassembly. Mount the pump on a table with the bearing frame bolt holes. Tie rod bolts. Start by removing the coupling from the discharge. Using a 17mm wrench, remove the 4 nuts and washers from the discharge end. Remove the pump foot. Remove the 4 tie rod bolts that hold the pump stator in place by unscrewing them from the hopper base plate. Gently tap the discharge fitting with a rubber mallet and punch to aid in removing it from the stator. Stator, rotor, and auger rod removal. Using a small flat-bladed screwdriver, carefully pry the O-ring out of the groove and slide it towards the auger. You will now be able to slide the sleeve away from the drive shaft, exposing the first pin. If the pin is not accessible, turn the drive shaft by using a strap wrench on the stator. Using a punch and hammer, tap the pin out halfway. Use a strap wrench on the stator to turn the shaft until you are able to pull the pin the rest of the way out with pliers. You should now be able to remove the stator, rotor, and auger-style connecting rod. Lay the rotor assembly on the workbench. Using a small flat-bladed screwdriver, carefully pry off the O-ring towards the connecting rod. Slide the rotor pin sleeve towards the connecting rod using the assistance of a hammer and punch if it remains stuck. Use the hammer and punch to remove the rotor pin. The connecting rod is now completely separated from the rotor and drive shaft. Set the stator and rotor vertically on the workbench. Add liquid soap to the inside of the stator as lubrication to assist in removing the rotor. Place the stator in a vise. Insert a sturdy punch into the pin slot and rotate the rotor counterclockwise to remove it from the stator. The rotor-stator assembly is now fully disassembled. Key and hopper removal. Carefully remove the key from the keyway by tapping it gently with a hammer and pin punch. To remove the hopper, loosen and remove the 4 hopper nuts and washers with a 17mm wrench. You can now remove the hopper from the bearing frame. Use a small flat-bladed screwdriver to carefully remove the hopper seal O-ring from the bearing housing. Bearing housing disassembly. Remove the 4 bearing cover bolts with a 10mm wrench. You may need to use the assistance of a hammer and small flat-bladed screwdriver to remove the bearing cover. Remove all excess grease from the exposed bearing. If salvageable, it can be stored for reuse. Place the bearing housing in a vise vertically. Secure it at the drive shaft with the keyway facing up. With a punch and hammer, carefully tap and bend the tab on the tab washer out of the slot on the lock nut. Use a small spanner wrench to unscrew the lock nut and remove it from the drive shaft. Remove the tab washer. Remove the bearing housing from the vise and put it in the press with the keyway facing up. Make sure the housing is positioned in such a way that the stationary half of the mechanical seal is not impeded as it is pressed out with the drive shaft assembly. Remove the housing from the press. Place the assembly back in the vise with the keyway facing up and remove the spacer. While pressing out the drive shaft, make sure to keep pressure on the inner race of the bearing. With the bearing removed from the drive shaft, you will now be able to remove the grease seal cover, flinger ring, and stationary seal housing. To remove the rotating half of the mechanical seal, place the drive shaft in a vise. Use a small wedge to carefully pry the seal off of the shoulder towards the keyway and slide it off of the shaft. If necessary, you can remove the stationary seal from the housing. Place the housing in a press in a way that allows the bearing to be pressed all of the way out. Use an adapter if necessary to keep pressure on the inner race of the bearing. There is a snap ring installed inside the bearing housing. If needed, it can be removed with a pair of snap ring pliers. The Freedom Series progressive cavity pump is now completely disassembled. Be sure to inspect both halves of the mechanical seal, flinger ring, seal cover, and bearings for wear and replace if required. If you have any questions about or require spare parts for the repair of your Liberty Process Freedom Series hopper pump model 2FJL 2.6, please feel free to contact us at www.libertyprocess.com. We always have complete pumps and all spare parts in our inventory ready to ship the same day.